NASA says that at this point it is a great fundamental opportunity to focus on the planet Venus. This follows recent revelations of possible life on the planet. If you examine NASA's records from the 1960s, you'd see the space agency referring to Venus as a planet of judgment. Meanwhile, Mars became our primary objective. Such descriptive naming of planets wasn't unusual during the intense space race era. The Soviet Union, on the other hand, focused on sending missiles to Venus. The hostile planet showed little potential for life, yet the Soviet space program didn't decommission the Venera program until the fall of the USSR. According to Neil deGrasse Tyson, we now understand why. Join us as we explore the declassified photos from Venus taken by the Soviet Union. The fall of the Soviet Union was significant in more ways than one. Not only did it reshape the world's political structure, but it also unlocked numerous mysteries. The Soviets had a strong tendency to keep secrets, from running one of the fastest intelligence agencies in the world to being secretive about their technological limits. This suggests that extraterrestrial contact might have been among those hidden truths. The former superpower holds many untold secrets. Before the U.S. surpassed all planetary missions in space exploration, the Soviet Union led the way, while the U.S. and USSR shared a long history of successful and failed space missions. The Soviets primarily focused on the hostile planet Venus. In Russian, Venus is called Venera, which was also the name of their mission program that lasted from 1961 to 1983. During this period, the U.S. concentrated on its missions to the Moon. In a way, the Soviets chose to allocate their resources differently. We cannot say that the Soviets' fascination with the second planet from the Sun was unusual. Did they want to use Venus's surface as a potential power station, or were they perhaps hoping to colonize the planet? Were they searching for signs of life beneath its surface? The question remains, why were the Soviets so focused on this hostile planet? As the Soviets conducted these missions during the Cold War, they weren't entirely open about their objectives. In fact, everything we know about the Venera missions comes from declassified and archived data. After significant effort in pinpointing what the Soviets were actually looking for and whether they ever uncovered Venus's secrets, one thing stands out: the Soviets landed on Venus not once, not twice, but repeatedly. That's right, the Soviets launched 28 costly rockets toward Venus. Of these, 13 entered Venus's atmosphere and 8 successfully landed. Such complex missions put the Soviets in a leading position in space exploration. Sure, the U.S. was a close second, but NASA focused more on satellites and advanced technology than on searching for life on other planets. Their attention was on Mars, which wasn't a particularly odd or wrong focus. Your history class might not tell you this, but the Soviet space program was the first to send a probe into the atmosphere of another planet. It also achieved several other firsts. The USSR became the first nation to accomplish a soft landing on another planet and to return images and sounds from its surface. The Soviets had their own one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind moment long before the U.S. So why do we rarely hear about these achievements? Remember what we mentioned about the Soviet tendency for secrecy. This is one of many reasons the Soviet space program's accomplishments are often overlooked. In 1992, the famous agency was decommissioned following the USSR's collapse and later rebranded as Rose Cosmos. Many of its original records were either lost or destroyed. This is precisely why we lack clear answers about the Soviets' motivations for launching 28 rockets into Venus's atmosphere. Still, we can make reasonable assumptions. Perhaps the Soviet decision to explore Venus was more about cost efficiency than anything else. That's not to say the space program didn't recognize the planet's scientific potential. They were searching for viable water levels, sunlight radiation, and the overall characteristics of the planet. Without these missions, it would have been nearly impossible to assess Venus's high temperatures and dense atmosphere today. Many astronomers don't believe the hostile planet could support life. Its temperatures are high enough to melt lead, and water is scarce. Moreover, due to its thick atmosphere, the atmospheric pressure on Venus is approximately 92 times that of Earth. Even so, ongoing advancements continue to explore its potential. To dismiss the USSR's contribution to the study of Venus would be to rewrite history. Venus was worth studying, even though exploring other, more hospitable planets like Mars wasn't entirely out of reach. However, it was far more expensive. The primary difference boils down to distance. The hostile planet Venus is on average just 40 million km away from Earth, while Mars is about 250 million kilometers away. These vast differences in distance result in significant differences in cost. Had the U.S. not been the world's largest economy, it might never have explored Mars successfully. Other reports suggest Soviet missions were dangerous and faced significant technical challenges. Their rockets couldn't cover vast distances, and they had a poor track record of maintaining contact with them. Thus, it makes sense why the Soviet space program chose closer and more achievable missions to yield results. If we ignore the space race context, the story of the Venera missions feels incomplete. The U.S. wasn't even on the space exploration map when the Soviet program launched the first artificial satellite Sputnik 1 in 1957. This move sparked the space race and kept the momentum alive. What's particularly interesting is why the U.S. focused on the Moon instead of Venus. NASA had a series of disappointments with its Venus missions during the 1960s, leading to what became known as the Venus curse. Every time they launched a probe into Venus's atmosphere, it failed. This was precisely when the Soviet Union seized the opportunity to capitalize on NASA's failures. At the time, both the U.S. and USSR were determined to end the space race. The Soviet space program's strategic focus on Venus became its first major triumph in this cosmic competition. The Soviets' focus on Venus during the height of the space race revealed their ability to pivot strategies and capitalize on opportunities. By the 1970s, the Venera program had achieved groundbreaking milestones. In 1970, Venera 7 became the first spacecraft to transmit data back to Earth from the surface of another planet, surviving Venus's crushing atmosphere, aeric pressure, and extreme heat for a short duration. By 1982, Venera 13 and Venera 14 had returned color images of Venus's surface and analyzed its soil composition, providing humanity with its first clear view of Earth's neighboring planet. Despite these achievements, Venus's extreme conditions presented challenges that limited the lifespan of the missions. The surface temperature of Venus averages around 475 degrees Celsius 887 dF and its dense atmosphere, composed mostly of carbon dioxide with clouds of sulfuric acid, is a hostile environment for machinery. The Venera landers were designed to endure these conditions only briefly, yet their success in sending data was a testament to Soviet engineering ingenuity. While the Soviets were making strides with Venus, the U.S. had shifted its attention to the Moon and Mars. The Apollo program culminated in the first human landing on the Moon in 1969, a feat that overshadowed many of the Soviets' robotic accomplishments. Venera Program focused on Mars and Venus as well, but technical failures and the Venus curse meant that their efforts lagged behind the USSR's dominance in Venus exploration. However, as the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union dissolved, funding for the ambitious space program dried up. This marked the decline of the Venera missions and the transition of the Soviet space program into its modern successor, Roscosmos. Despite their cessation, the legacy of the Venera program remains significant. The data collected by the Venera missions helped shape our understanding of Venus's geology, atmosphere, and climate, offering critical insights into why Venus evolved so differently from Earth despite their similarities in size and composition. In recent years, interest in Venus has been rekindled. NASA and other space agencies have proposed new missions to study the planet more extensively, spurred on by the possibility of microbial life in its upper atmosphere. The discovery of phosphine gas, a potential biosignature in Venus's clouds in 2020, revive discussions about the planet's habitability. These developments highlight the relevance of the Soviets' early Venus missions, as much of what we know today about the planet stems from their pioneering work. The story of Venus exploration is a reminder of the ingenuity and determination that define the space race. The Soviets' decision to focus on Venus despite its hostile environment demonstrated a unique approach to space exploration that prioritized achievable goals and ground-breaking scientific achievements. As humanity looks to the future with plans to explore Venus further, the Venera program stands as a cornerstone of our understanding of this mysterious and hostile world, yet again achieving something its opponent had neglected to do, regardless of what the Soviet Union's restricted assets and faltering government were. It was no match for the persistent quest for their space objectives. They repeatedly launched missions to Venus to maintain their leading position over the US, as opposed to NASA's focus on the Moon. This key decision wasn't without malice. Moreover, clever publicity was used to cloud their significant failures with Venus. The American government was provoked to investigate the USSR's focus on the planet, with the media labeling Venus as the evil planet while Mars became mankind's destiny. These labels didn't matter to the Soviets. Their main goal was to showcase their supremacy over the Americans, and they succeeded in doing so. The Venera missions are almost forgotten in modern history, yet despite their early troubles, these missions were remarkably exceptional, highly innovative, and aggressive at the start of the space age. Looking back to the 1950s, the Soviets began testing the designs and technical details of their probes. Over the next 30 years, they continued to build and launch interplanetary rockets as part of the Venera program. Since the program coincided with the Cold War, the Soviets focused on improving their resources. Luckily for them, the early years of the conflict provided them with more resources than the U.S., which proved to be immensely important. It allowed them to build larger rockets capable of breaking through high altitudes and covering vast distances. The Soviets rushed to experiment with both manned and unmanned rockets, while the Soviet academic community worked on a series of calculations and evaluations to plot accurate courses for the Venus missions. Behind the scenes, their Mars programs were also active. However, nothing was more important than developing advanced instrumentation for these missions. This led to significant breakthroughs in the history of space exploration. In 1966, the Soviet Union launched Venera 3, making it the first artificial probe to enter Venus's atmosphere and successfully land on the planet's surface. This achievement intensified the competition between the two superpowers. Unlike the American missions, which were plagued by failures and setbacks, the Soviet program continued to make progress. Despite their successes, the USSR managed to send probes successfully into Venus's atmosphere. The primary challenge with this approach was the limited design capabilities. The Soviets quickly overcame these design issues and launched the most sophisticated probes of the Venera program during the 1970s. Their pioneering efforts allowed them to achieve the first simultaneous launches of Venera 4 and Venera 5. According to most historians, this was the most extraordinary decade in the history of space exploration. Certainly the U.S. tried to develop similar launch methods, so why did the Soviet program choose simultaneous launches to Venus? To understand this, you need to recognize that interplanetary travel requires advanced instrumentation to gather the highest level of data and evidence. The probes were initially launched to study the planet's surface, and that's exactly what happened with Venera. Since the launch went smoothly, the probe successfully entered Venus's atmosphere. The Soviet program continued with Venera. But this wasn't just a repeat of the first launch. The second probe was specifically designed to gather detailed information about the planet. Ultimately, Venera 7, the final successful launch, made history by being the first spacecraft to land successfully on Venus. The entire mission marked an extraordinary competition between the Soviet Union and the U.S. The Cold War space race never slowed down. The success of Venera 7 was a monumental achievement. It became the first space vehicle to send back messages from the surface of Venus, an accomplishment that had eluded NASA and other space organizations. It transmitted data for more than 23 minutes before losing contact, which was remarkable given the planet's extreme conditions. This victory was part of the USSR's broader strategy to showcase its supremacy in space exploration. While the U.S. focused on moon missions, however, the Soviet triumphs didn't come without setbacks. While the Venera probes were crucial for Venus exploration, they were also plagued with challenges. For instance, the harsh conditions on Venus. Its dense atmosphere, extreme heat, and crushing pressure made it difficult to maintain communication and keep the probes operational for extended periods. Despite these difficulties, the Soviets continued their missions. Venera 9, launched in 1975, succeeded in sending back the first black and white images from Venus's surface, further cementing the USSR's leadership in planetary exploration. The Soviet space program's work on Venus wasn't just about outshining the US. It was also about gathering essential scientific data. The Venera probes established that Venus had a surface temperature of around 465 degrees C, 869 degrees Fahrenheit, incredibly hot for any Earth-like life to exist. The probes also confirmed that the planet's atmosphere was primarily composed of carbon dioxide, with clouds of sulfuric acid, making it one of the most hostile places in the solar system. Despite this harsh environment, some scientists have continued to speculate about the possibility of life in Venus's upper cloud layers, where conditions might be more temperate. Recent discoveries, such as the detection of phosphine gas in Venus's atmosphere, have reignited interest in the planet. This has led to renewed efforts by space agencies like NASA, ESA, and Russia to launch new missions to Venus as scientists strive to learn more about its history and whether life ever existed there. The Venera program, now largely forgotten in popular memory, was a pioneering effort that provided much of the first concrete data about Venus. The Soviet Union's commitment to these missions demonstrated their determination in the space race and their technical accomplishments in planetary exploration. It laid the groundwork for future missions to both Venus and other planets. With the collapse of the USSR and the end of the Venera program, Venus exploration slowed. NASA's focus shifted to Mars, and much of the scientific community turned attention elsewhere. However, as we look to the future, Venus may take center stage once again with new advancements and international collaboration. The mysteries of this hostile planet may yet reveal more hidden truths, ones that could change our understanding of life in the universe.